Good evening. We are coming on the air with breaking news right now out of the Middle East. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying that the Pentagon has just launched retaliatory strikes on ISIS targets in Syria in response to an attack that killed American troops last weekend. I want to get straight to our senior national security correspondent, Courtney Kube, who joins us live. Courtney, again, these were in retaliation for that ambush attack that happened on those two National Guard troops from Iowa.
Yeah, that's right. Just about a week ago, we heard that news, the ambush near Palmyra, which is in central Syria. It's not too far from where the U.S. actually has a military garrison there in southern Syria known as Atan. But Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth today announcing via social media the beginning of what he called Operation Hawkeye Strike. It's an effort to eliminate additional ISIS locations throughout Syria. Now, the types of locations that they're going to hit in these sorts of operations would be infrastructure. So places where ISIS will store their weapons, where they potentially will build things like drones, potentially even places where they will conduct training. Remember, the ISIS presence is not the same as it was a decade ago. It is much more disparate, is much more spread out. They don't have large locations that would be an obvious target point, but Central Command, the regional military command that owns Syria and owns that whole area for the United States military, they always have options for strikes like these. President Trump, in literally the hours after that attack last Saturday, came out and said that he planned to retaliate, and he planned to retaliate big. The U.S. military launching that. The big question now is how and when or will ISIS respond? And I think that is what will dictate whether this Operation Hawkeye Strike ends today or whether it continues for a matter of days or even weeks, Tom.
But Courtney, these initial strikes are not just one and done, right? It seems to be a little bit more widespread than we thought.
It is. I mean, it's the similar kind of locations and targets that we would expect in something like this. So, again, infrastructure, weapons caches, that sort of thing. But the big question now is, were they able to get all of the locations that they wanted to target here? I'm told that this is multiple U.S. military platforms that were involved in this, different types of fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters and military assets. The question is, though, if ISIS hits back at the American presence there, then we definitely we should expect to see continued retaliation from the United States. Based off of the social media posts that we've already seen out of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, it does not appear that this is something that he will let go if ISIS hits back.
Okay, Courtney, stand by for us. I want to go right to the White House now. Gabe Gutierrez joins us live. Gabe, the president had vowed to get revenge on the deaths of those U.S. soldiers, and that's what we're seeing tonight.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. And just within the past few moments, we got our first reaction from a White House official who tells me that President Trump told the world that the U.S. would retaliate for the killing of our heroes by ISIS in Syria, and he is delivering on that promise. So certainly this is something that the administration telegraphed for the last several days. And also President Trump has repeatedly said when he's been asked about this over the last several days that this was in an area of Syria that was not controlled by the new Syrian government. The president, of course, hosting the new president of Syria who toppled Bashar al-Assad, Ahmad al-Sharaa. He hosted him here at the White House just several weeks ago and has been trying to make sure that the U.S. supports him and does not blame him at all for this strike or for the ISIS ambush attack on these two members of the Iowa National Guard. But again, just within the past few moments, we've received that statement from the White House saying that the president did vow this retaliation, and he is making good on that promise, Tom.
Okay, Gabe Gutierrez, stand by for us as well. We are tracking two stories out of Washington tonight, not just those military strikes, but the Justice Department just releasing a massive trove of records in the case of the late convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. Our teams of reporters and producers and experts have been digging into those documents. There are thousands of them, including our national law enforcement and intelligence correspondent, Tom Winter. Tom, you're joining us live now. I know everyone's still sort of going through these documents, but it's been an hour or so. What have we learned?
Tom, to give you kind of the gist of what we're seeing, the Justice Department opened a website and they published all sorts of government reports having to detail with Epstein, his death, the non-prosecution agreement, which of course garnered so much controversy back in 2007. They've also released a significant amount of court filings in civil court filings, many of which we've already seen or reported on previously. They do have 4 volumes that appear appear to be new, or at least information that they haven't previously released before in this form. All told, that's 3,500 files. Now, some of those files have multiple pages attached to them. It's totaling more than 2.5 gigabytes of material that includes investigative reports and photos. Some of those photos that we're seeing do involve prominent people in American politics, including former President Bill Clinton. A photograph of him in a hot tub. You're looking at that photograph there. There's an additional person in that photograph, a little tricky to see, whose face is redacted. But, of course, as we've reported in the past, the former president denies any sort of wrongdoing. And it's important to remember that in July of this year, this Justice Department and FBI under the Trump administration has said that there's not even enough new information to even open a case, Tom, let alone bring a successful prosecution against any uncharged third parties beyond Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who were, of course, convicted in the case of Maxwell, convicted in the case of Epstein, died by suicide in a Manhattan federal prison. As far as the other pieces of information that we're getting from this, it does appear that the Justice Department and the FBI did continue their investigation in southern Florida even after Epstein signed that non-prosecution agreement, traveling to Australia to interview a potential victim. And there are a number of case files going back to 2019 when they successfully brought a case against Epstein, or in the process of trying to successfully bring a case against Epstein in 2019 that have to do with the FBI here in New York and the NYPD. Some of that information, Tom, includes photographs that are very disturbing, that are heavily redacted or redacted in full, and some of those have been labeled CSAM, or child sex abuse material. To be clear, the Justice Department has made sure that there are no photographs of any individuals that could identify their faces or any sort of other identifying characteristics in those photographs, but obviously deeply disturbing.
Yeah, Tom, before you go, there have been other sort of strange photographs, if you will. There are some of Jeffrey Epstein with Michael Jackson, but the context of a lot of these photos is still not understood completely at this hour. You
know, that's what makes it so difficult, Tom, is that a lot of these photographs are undated. They come in the form of these files, so we're not clear whether they originate from the FBI's investigation in Florida, whether they originate from any sort of a local Palm Beach Police Department investigation, which, of course, kicked this off. Those case files are in here, too. And it's not clear whether or not those documents were uncovered at Epstein's mansion, when we were told that multiple boxes of photographs were recovered in a search warrant in 2019 after he landed in Teterboro, New Jersey, to the surprise of federal handcuffs. So that's at least the initial indication of this as it stands before Nightly News on Friday afternoon. But, of course, given the size and scope and volume of this, and the fact that the Deputy Attorney General of the United States said earlier today that they are not releasing today all of the documents, they still have more to make public. We don't know yet what is and isn't in these documents.
Yeah, we'll keep digging through those documents as we get ready for the broadcast tonight. All right, Tom, we thank you for that. That's going to conclude this NBC News special report. We're going to have much more, as I just said, coming up on Nightly News. I'm Tom Llamas. We thank you so much for watching. We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.